Today we're beginning a new chapter, a new section, which really is taking the first 6 chapters and building on it, taking it to the next level, explaining what now. So we have this information. So just to recap the primary point we made in the first 6 chapters, we're taking a verse from the Torah where it says, Moshe Rabbeinu tells the Jewish people, you shall know today, you shall take to heart and understand that God is the God and no one else exists besides him. And we explained in the previous classes, what does it mean no one else exists besides him? Not that no other God exists, because that's not a new thing. We have in the 10 Commandments, we have in Aseret Dibros, I am the Lord your God who took you out of Egypt, don't worship any other gods. So it's not just no other gods. What we're learning here is that there is no other power, no other expression of godliness and truth outside of God, which means the concept that we see as Havaya, which is godliness absolutely revealed, and the concept we see as Elokim, godliness concealed, is all one. There doesn't exist 2 separate things by Hashem, which means everything we see in this world, that Elokim, the level of Elokim, conceals godliness. The level of Elokim conceals the absolute expression of godliness, which would stop our existence. We'd be like the light of the sun within the sun. All of that only exists before us. Before Hashem, as far as Hashem is concerned, there is no other power, which means Elokim does not exist as a separate entity, which means there is no room for any other existence. So as far as Hashem is concerned, nothing else exists besides Hashem himself. That's what we explained until now. Now we're going to really shift the focus a little bit, and instead of focusing just, move the camera just a bit, instead of focusing just on how we are expressed, not expressed, let's talk about the expression from God's side. And to do this, we're going to go into, which is a very special part of the Tanya, explaining the Shema. We're going to have now, starting today, a beautiful insight to understand when we say the Shema on a much deeper level than we might have said until now. Until now, the Shema might have meant, Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. There's only one God. We're going to explain at a much deeper level that Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Havaya and Elokim, Havaya Echad is all one. There is no separate Havaya, no separate Elokim. It's all one. And then we're going to explain the verse of Baruch Shem. Baruch Shem Kivay Malchusei. The Elam Ved is going to talk about the concept that there is a world, there is a universe, and all that is nullified before God. In other words, Shema Yisrael is the perspective from Hashem's side, how nothing else exists besides Hashem. Baruch Shem is the perspective from our side, that we all do exist, but we're all completely nullified before God. Very big difference. Nothing else exists, or we exist, but we're nullified before God. Very big difference. These are the 2 approaches. In Chassidus, we call it Yechuda Ilah and Yechuda Tata. The higher level of unity and the lower level of unity. Meaning the unity of God and the world could be understood in 2 ways. One is nothing exists except Hashem. One is the world exists, but everything you see is godliness expressed. The cup that we see here is absolutely existing because Hashem is making it exist right now. And this is what we're going to explain, this idea of Shema Yisrael and Baruch Shem. It's actually beautiful that we're doing it today, because in the Rambam, in the 3 Parakim a day, 3 chapters of Rambam that we're studying, we're discussing the mitzvah of saying the Shema every single day and what it means. As a matter of fact, the Rambam goes and gives a beautiful little introduction, and he said, where does Pasuk Baruch Shem come from? Where does Pasuk come from? So there's various opinions what it is. One opinion is, what the Rambam tells us, is because in the Chumash it doesn't say Baruch Shem. It says Shema, Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, V'yahavta Eis Hashem Elokecha. There's no verse Baruch Shem. We say it quietly, Baruch Shem, etc. So the Rambam explains that when Yaakov Avinu was passing away and he's lying in his deathbed, so he had a suspicion that some of his children are not the way they should be. Maybe they've gone off the path a bit, because he had a plan to share a prophecy with them and it disappeared from his mind. So he said to himself, hey, 1 second, maybe one of my kids are not okay. So they said to him, Shema Yisrael, here, as we know, Yaakov had 2 names, Yaakov and Yisrael. Shema Yisrael, here, our father Yisrael. Hashem Elokeinu, our God is Hashem Echad, all one God. All 12 of us worship the same God. We're all one, nothing to worry about. And he was like, Baruch Shem, thank God, everything's good. And that was his response. And to remember that, we always say his response, that he said, thank Hashem for this kindness, that all my children are on the right path. So this is the origin of the Shema and Baruch Shem, according to the Rambam's laws yesterday that we studied, or 2 days ago. There's also a lot of commentary that explains the Shema. The first 3 letters of the word of the Shema is Shin Mem Ayin, which stands for Se'u Marim Einechem, which is the beginning of a statement that says Se'u Marim Einechem U'u Mi Bara Ela, which means lift up your eyes to the heavens and realize where everything comes from. So that's the first letters of the Shema. We have that Shema. Also, the word Shema is 2 words: Shem, Shin Mem, and Ayin, which represents the 70 nations. And then Yisrael is Yashar Kel, the one nation of God. You have the 7 nations around the world, and the one nation, and our strength of overpowering and unifying the world. There are many things to study and learn in Chassidus about the verse of Shema. Today, we're going to focus on one main idea, and that is that Shema, the first verse, the first line of Shema, represents Yichud Ilah, Hashem's perspective, the ultimate altruistic view of Hashem sees the world, nothing else exists, and Baruch Shem, how we see that exists. As a side note, there's a very geschmacke Maimer, I believe it's the Rebbe Rashab, the 5th Rebbe, where he explains why we whisper the Baruch Shem instead of saying it out loud. Why are we whispering it? What is it, a secret that we exist as a world and we serve God, we recognize our unity with Hashem? So he says a metaphor of a king who is in his palace, and they bring him out the most delicious meal, the most delicious, let's say it's baked chicken or brisket. I don't know what for me it's chicken, the most delicious meal. And when they bring it out, he enjoys it very much. We know what he enjoys even more? When no one's looking, or he thinks no one's looking, the king likes to sneak into the kitchen, and at the bottom of the pan, there's the crunchy edges of the chicken that's stuck to the pan. This is what it says in the mimer there. And he likes to gnash at those crunchy edges because the way it cooked and caramelized and flavored, it's not nice to put on the plate, but it's the best part of the chicken. So it says Hashem, of course, officially, there's nothing else except God. It's all one. Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu. But Hashem says, what do I really enjoy? The Baruch Shem. He likes to enjoy the fact that we do exist and we have our emotions and we have our feelings, and nevertheless we try to serve him. So it's not nice to say it out loud, so we say it quietly. But that's what Hashem really enjoys, the crunchy little edges of the chicken stuck to the pan, of those French fries that stuck to the bottom and taste the best. So those are the ideas of Shema Yisrael and Baruch Shem. Okay, so we explained that in the first 6 chapters, the idea of the oneness of Hashem, of Havaya and Elikim. Now we're going to go on to explain how the Zohar explains the Shema. Those who are following inside, it's page 162, chapter 7, a brand new thing. So even if you missed out some of the previous discussions, it doesn't matter. It's a fresh beginning of this topic. Now we can understand what it says in the Zohar. HaKadosh, the Holy Zohar, written by Rabbi Shalom Bar Yochai about 2,000 years ago, and then it was disappeared for many years. For most of this time, for 1,500 years, it was disappeared from the universe. No one knew where it was, and it reappeared a few hundred years ago when Hashem wanted to begin spreading Chassidus and spreading the teachings of the Torah on a much deeper level. Hashem made it accessible together with all the other teachings of Chassidus that became available in the last few hundred years. Okay, so the Zohar writes, the pasuk Shema Yisrael, the verse Shema Yisrael, who Yichud Ilah is the higher level of the unity of God. So now we're calling these perspectives Yichud Ilah, the higher level, the deeper, more advanced level of Hashem's oneness, and nothing else exists. And Ubarach Shem Kived Malchus Elon Ved, and that verse of Baruch Shem is Yichud Tata. And before we go further, I just want to mention, if you want to really appreciate this, what we're going to say in the next page or so, open up the Siddur now or later to Adonai Aleph. And the first 2 sentences of Adonai Aleph are exactly what we're going to discuss here. The first verse is Adonai Aleph, Asher Malach, Beterem Kol Yitzul Nivra. Hashem Nivra. Hashem, the master that existed even before anything was created. And then it says, but when he created the universe, then he's called the king. And if you take those 2 verses in your mind, I'll go back to them, you will see a beautiful understanding of this entire chapter. And I'll go back when it's time to explain those again. Now, where is the similarity of these 2 verses? The last word. The last word of the sentence of Shema And the last word of the sentence of Baruch Shem is the word echad and va'ed. Now the Zohar explains that the word echad and the word va'ed are the same things. If you remember going back to the very beginning of this section of Tanya, the section about the oneness of God, the unity of God. So we started off discussing how Hashem's words that he said with the 10 utterances created everything. And everything in the world comes from Hashem's words, the trees, the plants, the animals, the fish, everything comes. And the question was, one second, we don't find every single creature mentioned there. We find grass, we don't find cherry trees, rose bushes. Where do you get all the others? You don't find the word horse. You find, general expressions. So we gave them an example, gave a concept that every single letter has many other letters interchangeable with. And that's based on like all different categories. For example, we said every letter made from the same part of the throat, mouth, or teeth, or lips is one category. Another category we said was atbash, the first and last letter. Then we they switch at, bash, aleph and taf, beis and shin, etc. Then we gave another thing, any letter that's a vowel, which uses a vowel could interchange. We gave like 5 different ways that letters could interchange or replace. Another one was numerical values. Letters that have similar numerical values, all different methods. And what Hashem did was when he created the world, he included all the other possible formats and formations of words through interchangeable choices. For an example, here when it says aleph, it really means a beis, it means a gimel, it means a ches. When all the different letters, what they really could mean, that means if you do those combination changes and change the order of the letters, another thing called order changing, you will find every single creation in the world. And here's the key. Depending on how strong the energy of creation was, that's how many levels of change and filters it had to be. So something which is much more disconnected from godliness had to be changed maybe 2 or 3 times. An aleph to a ches to a hey to an ayin, had to be changed a few times. Something that's more spiritual, more obvious godliness, maybe it's just one change or it's said written very clearly. So the more times a letter is changed, the more it's hidden, is an indication, in this case, other times you say the opposite, it's an indication in this case that it's more concealed the godliness that's there. Okay. That being said, the word va'ed, the first letter of vav, is interchangeable with all the vowels. It's vav, aleph, hey. These are ayin. These are letters that are interchangeable with other letters because they could be used as vowels. They make certain sounds. So a vav and an aleph are interchangeable. So the letter va'ed is like the letter aleph in echad. So the letter vav in va'ed, the first letter is like the first letter of echad, which is aleph. It's just hidden. It comes out as a vav instead of as an aleph, which means it's a lesser expression. Then we have a ches and echad. The ches and echad could also be a ayin in va'ed. Why? Because they're guttural sounds. They come from the throat. Sounds that come from the throat, ah, ha, ha, those are all guttural. Those are interchangeable. Therefore, an ayin, and especially the ayin in its true form, we as Ashkenazim today say ayin not exactly correctly. An ayin really has an end sound to it. You throw that's why we say instead of Yaakov, we say Yankel. Where the nun get there? How do you get a nun into Yankel? Because the truth is, an ayin is not a pure it's a It has a certain n thrown in there, and the proper, just like the true daled and the true gimel have other sounds. Like it's we know a gimel is really a j. We say it as a gimel, but it's really like the letter G. There's a lot of different sounds in the proper technical pronunciation that we lost over the years. But the ayin and the ches are interchangeable, both guttural sounds in the throat. Therefore, the ayin and the ches are interchangeable. So you have the aleph could be the vav, and the ches could be the ayin. That's echad and vaed, and the last letter daled seems to be like it's not changed, but it absolutely is changed. How do you change a daled for a daled? That's a good trick. It was a daled, and now we say we changed it over to be a daled. The answer is, in the Torah, you'll find every single letter at least once in the regular size, which that you find many, many times. You'll find every letter at least once extra large. Let me look in the Chumash, in the Torah, the way it's written inside in the actual Torah scroll. You'll find from Aleph till Taf every letter at least once, or other places in the Nevi'im, in large. And the same thing is with the small. You'll find every letter what's called tiny. You'll find every letter in small, like the small Aleph in Vayikra. When Hashem calls to Moshe as a Vayikra, it's a small Aleph. So we find that Daled and Echad in the Chumash is written, the Torah is written with a large Daled. And the Daled is written in Va'ed, a small, regular Daled. Not small, but regular. So you see, we switched the large Daled for the small Daled. What's the difference of large and small? Large is full on energy. Daled, small, is less energy. So again, you see that the Echad and the Va'ed are complete repeats of each other, just in a filtered or hidden format. So, to our point, The Shema Yisrael represents an honest, open, unfiltered expression of the unity of God. And Baruch Shem represents a little filtered, a little bit hidden, a little bit lesser of the actual full-on truth, but something we can handle. We can't handle the absolute, unfiltered truth of God because it's something like being the light of the sun within the sun. So let's go back inside here. So we said, the Zohar continues to explain, Ki va'ed, the word va'ed, hu echad b'chilufei asvan, because the word echad is really the same as the word, well, the word va'ed really is a copy. Va'ed is the same as the word echad, but it comes in a form of transforms. In other words, Hashem had to conceal this truth, this idea of his true oneness from us. And now the question is, why? We didn't ask this question before. When we said, because we will have to exist. Well, why do we have to exist? Meaning the question the Alter Rebbe is going to address now is a very important question, a very fundamental question in all of Hasidic thought. Why was it so important to God that we exist as separate creations? What would be if we existed just as a layer of ray of light, as a ray of light as is found within the sun? Why do we have to exist as separate entities that don't see our true source? We don't see our true identity. As a matter of fact, it's easy to convince ourselves, especially because of our egos and our safety nets, that God doesn't exist. And because we do things on our own, and it's all nature, and it's natural, and it's random, and there's no God. And if God's there, he's maybe sitting, relaxing, doing something else, not watching every single detail. Why do we have a nature and need? Why did God find it necessary to create this nature and need for us to conceal and not see our true oneness with Hashem? Why was that important? And this is what he's going to explain here. And this is critical to understanding. I would say all of Hasidus talks and Sichas and Mamarim, and all of Hasidus in general. This is the thought behind why. Why did God create this world? And why did he create the world this way? Why he couldn't create it that way? Everything's just angels, not just angels. Sub-angels don't even exist as separate angels. They're just, concepts. Why did he have to create us as full-on separate identities? We're in here. Kihine, sorry. Kihine, sibas v'tam hatzimtzum v'hester hazeh. The reason why Hashem made a concealment, the reason why Hashem hid all of the true essence of himself to the point that we should exist as a concealed reality. Why is it concealed? I look at this cup of tea, I do not see God. I see a cup of tea, fairly warm, slightly pomegranate flavor mixed into some green tea. That's all I see here. You tell me there's God, I see how I could reveal some purpose when I make a bracha on this and I drink it for the sake of having an easier class to talk easier. I'm using this out to fulfill God's ultimate plans. I'm revealing some connection to God. But why did Hashem make it that I just don't see that this is godliness in the form of a cup? Why don't we see that? Tastes like God. So he explains as follows. And the reason he says, and not only did he hide the truth that he creates and is creating the world, but even the life force. We don't see, looking around the world, how God is a life force right now. We see how, bottom line is, the world runs pretty well. Fantastic ecosystem, great program. The way the cellular makeup of the world and how everything functions and constantly recycles itself is fantastic. We don't necessarily see right now Hashem's hand in giving us life. Why is that? Hashem wanted us, and it's very important for him that we should feel the world as a separate identity from him. He wanted us to feel different and disconnected from him. This is critically important to achieve his intention in creation. Why? In the Yedua, the Kol, we all know, says the Alter Rebbe, we all know, well, we should know this. Ki tachlis brias ha'elam hu, why did Hashem create this world? B'shvil esgalus malchusa yisbarach. Hashem wanted to express his malchus into the world. What is malchus? Well, first of all, it's a wise thing if somebody wants to enjoy themselves. Take the prayer of Pasach Eliyahu that we say before Shabbos. It's on page 150, I think. And take the time to read it in detail with the English, and maybe a student has some commentary, and learn where he describes there the 10 spheres. We're not talking about the 10 spheres within our soul directly. We're talking about the 10 spheres as they exist within Hashem's creation of the world. That's Chachma, Bina, Das, Chesed, Gvur, Tiferes, Netzach, Hod, Yesod, and Malchus. And then he explains how it's all found in our body. He says that we have some in our head, some in our body. Yesod, he says, is Yesod Barta, the last part of the person. And then he says Malchus is something else. It's the mouth. He goes back to the mouth. What's Malchus? Malchus really, the expression in Hasidus is les le megamei klum. Malchus has nothing. How much brilliance does your mouth have? The answer, nothing. But hey, you ever heard this guy's mouth? It's a mouth that speaks pearls. He's a brilliant scientist, physicist, orator, speaker, comedian. His mouth is brilliant. No, his mouth is just a tool. There's nothing there. So what's the mouth for? The mouth has one purpose. And when I say the mouth, I mean as a function of speech. The mouth has a purpose to eat and chew and swallow also. We're talking about the purpose of speech in the mouth, the power of Malchus, is only that you should know what I'm thinking. Why do we have speech? I have a thought. I have a feeling. I have a desire. And it's by me. If I want you to understand it, I got to share it with you. Does that mean the desires in my mouth? Does that mean the thoughts in my mouth, the feelings in my mouth? No. The thought could be in my mind, the feeling could be in my heart, the yearning could be in my soul. But all of that is only shareable to somebody else if I actually open my mouth and speak. You cannot know what I'm thinking. I mean, you'll see a little bit of a hint on the body language, but you can't know what I'm thinking properly unless I express it. In other words, the value of a mouth is not for itself. Malchus is not there for self. Malchus is not there for the level of itself. Malchus is there for other, to create other. Hashem wanted it to be an idea of Malchus to share to other. Furthermore, Malchus comes from the same word as Melech, a king. We're going to discuss right now what is a king. And a king is something that you don't find today, but we can understand it today. The most recent power of a king probably was the Tsars in Russia, who had the most current or most recent idea of a real king of absolute power. Nowadays, you have dictators. There's a big dictator between a king and a dictator, or somebody who is a tyrant. A king is someone that the people actually accept them as their king. That means the people accept you and recognize you as their king by their choice. Now, obviously, once you're their king, they don't have a choice what you tell them to do. But you're being their king is by their choice, which means the king is a phenomenal, complex reality. Let's say a couple of things about a king that's weird, interesting. A king is measured only by his people. While the king controls and is much greater than his people, when you want to talk about a great king in history, what it really talks about is their empire. How many people? Because if you have a king with no people, he's not a king. He's just a rich guy. If you have a king and all the subjects are his children, he's not a king. He just has a big family. What makes somebody a king is you have to have someone who's not the king. He's disconnected from the king. He's other. And the word we're going to find in a moment, we'll see inside. The word for am, the word for nation, where it says, Ein melech b'lei am, a king cannot be without a nation, without an am. The word am comes from the word amamais, or amis. What is that word? That is a coal, that the light in the coal has gone out, and no longer do you see on the outside of the coal any flame. The coal looks like it's cooled down. It looks like it's just gray. It doesn't have any heat to it. But the truth is it's an ember. Inside that, if you just fan it up, you'll see there's a flame inside it. But the coal has lost its function, its ability in a revealed way. You cannot see in this coal any fire. That's amames. That is the word of am. Am is you don't see in the people a connection to the king. There's no connection. He's the king. He is royalty. He's nobility. And you are nothing, a person. But you want him to be your king because you recognize who he is and you accept him as your king and therefore becomes your king. And now he is your king and he's a king of a people. So the relationship with the king and his people has two opposite functions or two opposite realities. On one hand, you make the king a king. Without you, he is nothing. He's a rich guy who lives in a big house. You can have kings that aren't so wealthy, not such big countries, but they have people. The less people they have, the more wimpy the king are. This king, he has 4 subjects. What do you mean he has 4 subjects? You know, we learn about the stories of the Jewish people coming into Eretz Israel. It says there were 31 kings living in Israel. Think about Israel, how small it is. 31 kings. Why are they called kings? Call them mayors. Call them governors. What do you mean there are 31 kings? And some people say they actually were kings that controlled other countries, and they all had a palace. This is like the we have some countries like embassy row, or all the kings have their palace. They all each had a location in Israel where they lived, but they all had kingdoms elsewhere. Others say no, these were the kings that were actually kings in that place. But how big of a king could you be with 300 subjects, 1,000 subjects? A king that has a lot of subjects is a real king. The Roman Empire, when they have empires, you are huge. You are incredible empires, powerful kings. At the same time, the people are nothing to the king. What does nothing mean? They have no opinion, no say, even in Jewish law. In Jewish law, if a king feels that a subject has disrespected him. For an example, you're standing in front of the king and talking to King David, or Shlomo Melech, or Shaul, and you notice a fly and you remove the fly from your nose. How do you even feel the fly? And the king has a right to execute you, and he's not considered a murderer. He has the right. Why? Because he has absolute power. You know, there's a famous story of the, I think one of the czars, that he came out, and one of his soldiers who was standing guard of the czar, somebody pointed out to him the incredible dedication of his soldiers standing guard, that one of them, his toes had become frozen, frostbitten, while he was standing there. So the czar said, have him whipped. They're like, what do you mean? Think how incredible he is. He stood there, didn't move, and even though his toes were freezing, he didn't budge. He goes, his blood should be boiling. If he would know who I am and understand who he's guarding, his blood should be boiling. How did he get cold? How did coldness? That's the perspective, the king impact. So when we say about a king, we say Hashem needed someone not himself, someone not his angels, someone who felt other, and that other should recognize God as a king. That's what God wanted. So why did Hashem have to have a concealment? Why did he have to have a concealment? Because he could never be a king if he had only his own things. Meaning, if everything in the world was godliness, that's not being a king. And God wanted to have a midah of malchus, a kingship, that I can share my life with others. And therefore, God had to create a reality where not only there existed something besides himself, like children or like other holy things, he wanted things that didn't feel him, didn't connect to him, and yet they recognized his greatness, and they wanted this power. I want him as my king. And when I say, long live the king, this should be my king, then God accepts the role and he becomes my king. And now I am his subject and I have to do whatever he wants. So the relationship of a king and a subject is what God wanted to create with creation. So if we go back, what was Hashem's intention? Hashem's intention was to reveal godliness in a place that was ungodly. In other terms, to be a king. To reveal godliness in a place that's ungodly, that is the definition of a king. To have someone that's not me recognize me. To have someone who's not my family, not my friends, not my people, it's not my own family, and they should look at me as I'm their king, that is kingship. And that's why Malchus, Dibur, is a mashal, a metaphor of kingship, and it says a king rules with his mouth. It's we have to be able, the idea of Malchus is that my speech has really no power for itself. It's just sharing that which came before me, that which is in my mind, in my heart. And meaning the Malchus is all about sharing with other, and that was the intention of the concealment, to make their existent other, and then Hashem could shine his light there. And again, if you have any question on this, this is a good time to ask, because this really is a core idea and understanding what Yiddishkeit's about, why we're here on this earth for, why do we exist, what's the purpose of life, why did God create us, why life sometimes seems to be so dark, why do we have to go and why do we have so many flaws in our character, why do I have things that have intentions to either talk lashon hara or do things that are wrong? Why did God make me this way? Because the more decrepit you naturally are, the more naturally you're pulled into unhealthy, unwholesome behaviors, and the more you change yourself, it's the more the kingship rules into the furthest point. The further the point is from natural holiness, we could conquer that. That's the ultimate conquering of the king. The king wants to expand his empire. Not only the shul should be holy, but your bedroom and your barbecue and your kitchen and your office. And not only that, also your desires for all the temptations, all those things should pull into those areas, the kingship, meaning the holiness. And that's the idea of Yiddishkeit in general, just to understand. Okay. What? Animals too are meant to be elevated. Our job is exactly, by the way, excellent point. We learned the Sikha earlier this week, that why did Moshe Rabbeinu before Mequon Torah go, instead of going up to the mountain on the fifth day, the day before Mequon Torah, he instead stays on the bottom and builds an altar out of rocks and out of and makes an altar with a sacrifice for animals, because he's reminding the Jewish people the ultimate goal is not to go to the top of the mountain. The ultimate goal is to bring the sanctity down here. Take the rocks inanimate. Take animals that naturally are just like I don't want to be offensive to the animals, but naturally they're into their own self-preservation. They're the animalistic part of our identity. And transform them to holiness, transform them, that's the ultimate. If we could take the animal inside of us, the animal around us, take a piece of steak and eat it with friends and have a barbecue and talk about it about Torah, you just took something which could be a gluttonous experience and made it meaningful and holy. So the more we can include, again, that which is forbidden, we can't engage yet. That which is permitted, even if it's the most coarse type of permittedness, indulging in a delicious meat, delicious cup of coffee, indulging in the most comfort, luxury of a home or car, etc. that all becomes holy when you put up mezuzah in their home. When you have a farbrengen in your home, when you have a boat that you take friends out on a day, and you guys learn Mishnayos on the boat, you are now expressing and spreading out the godliness into the places where it wasn't seen before. Just like Hashem wants with us created beings, where it wasn't seen until now, since creation, godliness, we go and reveal that, and that's what Hashem wants. That's how we become His subjects. So in other words, the whole experience of Yiddishkeit, of creation, is really about the idea of Malchus, sharing with other godliness, other recognizing God's being a king. We'll see all this inside now in more detail, or more accurately said. The ultimate purpose of creation, it's to express God's level of Malchus. There's no existence of a king without a people. I don't care how rich you are. Elon Musk, who might be the richest man in the world, or Steve Jobs, they're not kings. Well, they are very rich people. There are people that could be a king if they have subjects. Pirish, what does Am mean? Meloshin imamais, like a coal that has become extinguished on the exterior. That yes, there is an ember inside, but imamis means it's disconnected. You don't see it. You have someone who's not part of your family. You have some people, strangers, that you never knew them before, and they're willing to accept you as their king. That's a king. And he uses here three expressions. He says there are things that are nefradim, which means separate. Zarim, they're strange, and rechekim is far. So the Rebbe's father, when he writes his notes on Tanya, he writes these three words correspond to the three lower worlds. We know there are four worlds. There's Atzilus, there's Beria, Yetzira, and Asiya. Atzilus is the world of emanation, where it's absolutely godliness. Bria is where there's some creation of spirituality and a very lofty level. Yetzira is the next level coming down to us. And then Asiya has two halves. Two parts. The spiritual world of Asiya, which is all the angels are, and the physical world we are. We're on the bottom level, Asiya Agashmi, the physical part of Asiya. And he says these three words of disconnected, strange, and distant refer to Beria, Yetzira, and Asiya. Three different stages how we are in the process of creating universes, Hashem's process. Atzilus can't be called separate, because in Atzilus, that's why Malchus, where does Malchus start? When we say Malchus, we're talking about Malchus of Atzilus, the last level of Atzilus, as it feeds into the creation of the next world called Bria, because it's always a level, it's like a chain link, connect the next level. The level of Atzilus, as it comes to the last level of Malchus, now leading into Bria, that's the Malchus we're talking about. And Atzilus itself can't be called a nation. It's too close to God, it's God's son. It says, Les lebeg klum. It doesn't have, not Les lebeg. It says, Iyu v'gemir echad. His light and his vessels are one. At that place, you can't say God's emotions, God's feelings. There is no separation. So at Atzilus, we couldn't use the word kingship. Only starting from Beria, Yitzir, and Asiya, that's why the Rebbe's father explains, these three words of Nefradim, they are separate, refers to Beria. The Zarim, the strange, refers to Yitzira. And Rechekim, the distant, is referring to Asiya, even the spiritual part of Asiya. Mimailas HaMelech, because the king to have subject needs things that are outside of himself. Even if he had many children, the king had a huge family. The king could have 18 wives, have 100 children. If he works well, maybe 200 children. You can have a whole tribe of people. You're not a king. You're a tati of a lot of people. You're a dad. The kids treat you like you're their father. Even kings, their sons, with all being said, have a relationship as a father to a son. So, you can't say the word king on your children and your grandchildren. You can't. The only word you can say king is if they're not part of your family. All those part of your family, and even he says not just that, you can't even be a king of the ministers. The ministers can't be called your subjects. They're your assistants. So even the ministers can't be called. If all the king has is a family of 20 kids and 60 ministers running his palace, what are you a king over? To be a king, you have to have subjects who live outside you, who don't necessarily always agree with you or don't feel connected to you. And at one point in history, they made the choice. We accept you as our king. Now you're their king, for better or for worse, like a marriage or anything else. Once the relationship starts, there's a way to end the relationship. You have an uprising, you have a rebellion, and you could win. You could assassinate the king. But until that point happens, the king could quit. But until that point happens, as long as he's king, he has to have subjects that are not his children. Even if he had a lot of ministers, it wouldn't help him. So Hashem needed to be a king. Hashem needed disconnected concealed creations that feel a separate, distinct reality or existence. I'm sorry, a separate, distinct existence. And Hashem said, those could be my subjects. That's where I want to shine my light. I want to bring godliness down there. It's just with people that you become a king. The pasuk there is referring to something else, really. The pasuk B'Reiv Am is talking about whenever the king speaks, it's honorable to have a crowd. It's a little embarrassing when the president comes and 4 people show up. But the bigger the crowd, the more it makes the king look beautiful. And again, why does the king care? Who are you guys? You're my subjects. Yeah, but without the subjects, you look foolish. People of Prague, who are you? You have nobody here. In order to be a king, you have to have subjects. And the more subjects that show up, the more impressive your kingship is, which is a phenomenal concept. Why? You're the king, they're nobodies. But without them, you're nobody. Without them, you're just the king. You're just a rich guy. Now we're going to explain something else. And that is what name is associated with Malchus. We explained Havaya is associated with Chesed. Elikim is associated with Gvura. Which name of God? God has many names that are used, or a number of names that are used to express certain things. Which name is associated with this particular midah? It's called Adonai. Aleph, Daled, Nun, Yud. Aleph, Daled, Nun, Yud. Again, we always have a way how we say words so we could know which shame we're talking about. Like we say Havaya is Yud Kevavke, Elikim, Shakai. Adonai is how we say Adoi, etc. So Adonai is the name which represents God's being a God over something, the master, the boss. And that's why going back to Adonai Aleph, Asher Malach, Hashem was king, he ruled before anything was created. But he really wasn't called a king. When was it? Well, only when he created separate things, Azai then Shema could he be called Melech, a king. When is God called a king? Only after he has subjects. Of course, he was a ruler before. So Hashem can be the ruler without creating all these subjects. But who are you ruling over? Your sons? Your ministers? In order for Hashem to be called a king for real, he had to first have separate identities. That's why the second verse for Adonai Aleph, look it up, is only when he has creations could he be called a king for real. Hashem was the king before. Hashem will always be the king. But that type of king is not as impressive. Only when you have subjects that don't know you naturally and aren't part of you naturally, then you could be called a king for real. Okay. Kihu Adoin Kol Haaretz. And Hashem, why is he called Adnos? Because the true definition of a melech is that he's the master of all the land. That's what a king is. A king is someone who's the master. I'm the boss. I'm in charge. Obviously in charge of something. And it's this expression. This is really key. Now he's going to explain. So what's the process? We're really focusing from the first 6 chapters, focusing on how much we identify as separate existence to how Hashem's process is. So the process of creation required Malchus. So this that we say, there was Havaya, there was Yud Kei Vav Kei, which is Hashem's ultimate expression of essence. Then it was Elikim, which is like the sheath of the sun, which is the concealment, which is the restriction, which is hiding Hashem's essence. But that had to come through and channel through what's called Malchus. It was the Malchus that created the world. So how did the world come into existence? Through Malchus. But not that Malchus was the power. Malchus is the mouth, which means the Malchus doesn't have any power for itself, doesn't have any wisdom. The mouth isn't intelligent. The mouth isn't brilliant or feeling or emotional or hot or whatever the feelings are. The mouth is expressing that which came before it. So the Malchus has to express which came before it. But something amazing happens during that process. And that is a simple, obvious reality. No matter how strong your feelings are, something could hurt, something could be amazing. When you share it in words, it's limited. No matter how much you feel strongly about something, I understand a brilliant idea. I just figured out you cannot, there's no words to explain it. As a matter of fact, by divine providence, today's Hayom Yom, the Rebbe writes, he quotes the previous Rebbe, it's a beautiful Yiddish. He says, it's very difficult to find the words to explain the importance of saying the Mishnah all day long, wherever you go to know Mishnah. It's very difficult to find the words. And it's impossible to find the words of how much Hashem enjoys when a Yid goes around saying words of Mishnah and Torah by heart. In other words, how benefit is for your soul and how much it affects in a positive. So what do we say there? It's not that the information doesn't exist. There aren't the words to express it. By definition, words restrict. So words have just like the tzimtzum, which had 2 opposites, which the opposites came in the other order. I'm constricting in order to share, right? What's the symptom? I'm constricting how much, like the example I used last time was the fire hose. I'm constricting how much water is coming out of the fire hose so I can fill up your cup. If I don't restrict it, your cup's never getting full. So I have to restrict it, but for the sake of sharing. This is the opposite way around. I'm sharing and therefore restricting. Because I am sharing what's going on inside of me, by definition, I'm never expressing my full feelings. If I want to tell you how happy I am because of X, Y, or Z, or how sad I am because of X, Y, or Z, my words can't express it. You can't know what's in my heart. So that same function, which by definition is expressing something which is hidden, and I'm sharing at the same time, is automatically limiting. So this process of malchus, by definition, is the world of concealment. So now let's go back and see, just to finish off today's class, we'll continue for next week. What does it mean, Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad Baruch Shem? Shema Yisrael is telling us that in truth, Havaya Elokeinu are one, and nothing else exists besides God, who all like the light of the sun within the sun. That you can't point it out, it's there, but you can't see it. It doesn't exist as a separate identity. And then you have Baruch Shem, is how all this comes out into the physical world, that we do exist, and we are here, and we all have, there's a cup of tea, and there's our exercise, and there's our feelings, and our emotions, and we do 100% exist. But that is all bent and leaning and truth upon, founded upon the real truth that God is our source. God is our light. Our existence comes from God's energy, and our life comes from God's energy, and all of us is constantly recreated. And we feel that we have the perfect union of the foundation. The foundation is Yichud Elah, and then the reality we live in is Yichud Tata, our perspective that we exist, but it all comes from Hashem. And the Rebbe elsewhere is based on, again, something else of the Rebbe Rashab says, it's truthfully impossible to come to a full appreciation of Yichud Tata if you don't understand first Yichud Elah. As long as you never understood Yichud Elah, Yichud Tata seems very generic to us. Once you understand it as a perspective of God, we're all like the light in the sun, where it doesn't identify or exist as a separate identity. But you should know you exist now, and this is all by Hashem's power and light and force of energy. Then it gives a better understanding of Yichud Tata. And we'll continue with this in Hashem next week. But this is where we're going now with this, explaining why Hashem created and what was the effect of creating the world this way, where it's concealed, why we did it, and how through Malchus it actually is concealed, the process, but it's that concealment which makes us the true candidates to be God's people. We can only be God's people because we're His, because He created us separate. L'chaim. And now we can lift up this water and make it part of us. Separate, kind of part of it. I just think it's fascinating how Adonai Aleph, I never really noticed it so much until I learned this Tanya, how Adonai Aleph is such a beautiful, deep prayer, expressing and explaining the oneness of Hashem pre-creation and how that we see the oneness of Hashem post-creation. And on one hand, He was always the boss. The other hand is, you can't really be the boss with no employees. You know, I know you're always the boss, but this made you the boss. It's a very interesting idea and how important we are in Hashem's master plan of why He created us.